Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Scuro. I'd like to welcome you to our event today titled Disability, Neurodivergence, and Being Unwell, Strategies for Care and Community. Just some housekeeping to start. We are recording, so keep that in mind that as we record, you just keep yourself on mute. But any questions or comments, please put in the chat. Make sure that you're comfortable. Please, that's one thing we would definitely want as you listen or attend to our event today. If there's any issues, we have the captioning on of access. If you can't hear something, please put that in the chat as well. I do my best to monitor everything. So I'm an associate professor here at of philosophy and ethics here at Molloy. I teach disability ethics. I teach, philosophy of education. I chair the Heritage Months subcommittee for the Disability Awareness Month's events on campus. So it sounds like lots of layers. But our Disability Awareness Month is November 15 to December 15, just at that end of the semester. And I am wearing a gray sweater and glasses. I have dark brown shoulder-length hair and long beaded drop earrings that I absolutely love. And behind me is my very loaded bookshelf in my office. So this event is sponsored by the Siena Center for Social Justice. So much thanks to DJ Mitchell, our Vice President for Mission Integration, for his support of our programming. The Heritage Months Committee is led by Keisha Chandler, Nicolette Fraser Allen, and Patricia Rossi. So thank you to all of them for their assistance in making this event possible. We have another event on Monday. Next week, it's in person on campus called Rest, Repair, and Disability Justice. It's based on the work of Tricia Hershey. Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto, the NAP Ministry Rest Deck, the 10 Principles of Disability Justice. So please register for that event if you get it in your inbox. Keep an eye out for it on things like the Cork application, the Cork on campus. I will also put some links to those materials in the chat, and I'll probably have them up on our YouTube channel when we post the recording. I want to also especially thank Erin Riley, Jackie Williams, Kimberly Gearley, and Liz Mandrakia for helping me coordinate the event today, doing a lot of this background prep. I really appreciate it. I want to note and acknowledge the passing of disability rights activist and author Alice Wong last month. Her work was very influential to me in my work, but also my teaching. I just want as a reference for us the Disability Visibility Project. So I'll put that link there and I'll include it. But I think it's worth kind of bringing in references and resources that really I think are so impactful and really can be so important to these conversations moving forward. So now I get to introduce our panelists. Yay! So I'm so excited because putting this together was like such a happy magical thing. So our featured speaker is Mimi Cook, a writer, scholar, and teacher of all things Unwell. She is creator of the mental health projects Open in Emergency and the Asian American Tarot, and the author of Dear Elia, Letters from the Asian American Abyss. The book is our featured read for the month and is now available as an ebook through Molloy University's Jet Library. Of note, she's coping with these awful times by collecting cats. I will put a link to Mimi's bio also in the chat. We have also with us Gayatri Kavita Indar. She is an assistant professor of education in the School of Education and Human Sciences at Molloy. Dr. Indar's areas of specialization include critical understandings of special education pedagogy, disability, critical race theory, analyses of cross-sector systemic oppression, and subversive and collective strategies of resistance. Since entering academia, Dr. Indar's applied scholarship has included workshops using play as an anti-racist tool, adopting guerrilla gardening strategies to inform educational resistance, collaborating with the TPT/PBS STEM media education team, PBS STEM media education team to create inclusive characters for the Hero Elementary show, and piloting youth participatory action research projects for community-based organizations. And then we have on the panel Lauren Beaubrun. She is a second-year graduate student in speech and language pathology program here at Molloy. As someone who is neurodivergent, what sparked her interest was the question of representation within the program. She wanted to know if people like her were able to be successful in the field. A former professor encouraged her to become that representation herself, and that's what brings her to our discussion today. So I'm going to yield the floor first to our featured speaker, Mimi, to talk about the book. And please, if you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat and I'll try to address them. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much. You may see cats coming and going on my screen, as you already saw one. This one sits on my lap when I'm at the computer all the time. Very demanding. So, my name is Mimi Cook. That's Khuc. On your screen, you see a Asian American woman with short blonde hair, in front of a background that is a fake pandemic bakery, which is my dream bakery. Although I don't actually want to have a business, because then like you have to like try to make money, which I'm not good at. I just want to have a bakery where I just bake for fun and bake for people that I love. I'm going to talk about my book today. Thank you so much for having me to talk about my book, and thank you for featuring dear Elia. I'm actually going to read a couple of short excerpts from the book, and then hopefully we can have a fun discussion. Please participate as you feel comfortable. So I see many of you already have your cameras off. That's great. Do what you need to do to be comfortable. You could be lying down, walking around, eating, drinking. Participate on the chat as you would like to. Dear Elia. 6 years ago, I made a box and told you to open in emergency. I told you it was emergency already because I had come to learn as a daughter of refugees, as Vietnamese American, as Asian American, as a woman of color, as queer, as disabled, that the world makes us sick and we were not meant to survive it. I made that box for you as inheritance, an archive of Asian American unwellness and our attempts to move through that unwellness. I and your stepfather dreamed that box into being, filling it with hope and knowledge and tools along with those of a whole community, trying to make sense of this world so that you and others like you might learn how to save your own lives. To my greatest delight, that box went into the world and indeed began saving lives. Magic. In your hands now is a book. The goal remains the same: hope, knowledge, and tools to make sense of this world, everything I've learned in the years since making the box. Everything the life of that box has taught me about the shape of our collective unwellnesses and what it means to hurt and build care and go on living while it hurts in these times, in this world. A central lesson of the box is that wellness is a lie. This book explores the breadth and depth of that lie as I've traveled across its vast domain, and then shows us that the only way to survive is to be unwell together. I hope this book, like its predecessor, goes out into the world and saves lives. This too is your inheritance, my love. A box and a book, the kind of magic your mother has figured out how to make. May this magic help you understand all the ways the world will break your heart, and may it help you find joy and meaning and care throughout that journey. May it help you make your own magic in all your glorious unwellness. From my heart to yours, always, Mama. That's the opening letter to my daughter in the book. And now I'm going to read, I'm going to read just the first couple of pages to kind of set the overall intentions of the book. And then I'll do a fun little section about students. So these are the first opening pages if you want to read along, from the chapter called A Pedagogy of Unwellness. Dear reader, I don't write books. I make cool shit. Unclassifiable hybrids that break genre and form to give us something we didn't know we need. Tarot cards, curse casting, advent calendars, hack DSMs, and mental health pop-ups. What I make is as much about play as reading and thinking, as much about feeling as understanding, imbued with the too many feelings I have and know that others share. Theorize pain, but make it fun and healing. Academic books are not fun or healing. This is a book that pretends to be an academic book. It's not an academic book in that it doesn't do what academic books do. It's unconnected to tenure or other forms of academic achievement. As a permanent contingent scholar, I don't have to write a tenure book. I have no way of getting tenure, a forever foothold in the academy, nor do I want to. Tenure books are the mechanism by which new scholars demonstrate their worthiness to be accepted into the academy, writ small and large. Tenure books follow rules that uphold academic hierarchies and value systems. There are entire industries teaching new scholars these rules. This book doesn't follow those rules. But it is an academic book in that it does what an academic book should do: intervene in academic discourse, evaluate received knowledges, critically assess knowledge production, revolutionize higher ed pedagogy. It does these things with the further step of examining the academy itself. It just does all of this academic labor in weird ways. In Your Hands is the only kind of scholarly book I would want to write. It is a work on mental health that draws on and intervenes in Asian American studies, a work of critical university studies from the vantage point of a disabled, unwell Asian American adjunct. It is a pedagogical treatise that reframes teaching and knowledge-making as transformative care projects. A disability studies and disability justice grappling with our collective unwellness. It is also a book full of stories and feelings, both mine and yours, as you'll see. Theory in the flesh, mine and yours, so that we find our way through this thing called life. We plumb what we know and feel together. This book is a plea and a prayer that we all survive. It is a letter to you and my partner and my daughter, whose name graces the cover. It is a letter to Asian American students, Asian American studies, Asian American community. It is a letter to help us imagine a future worth living in. It is a call to feeling. It is grief and hope together. It is an exit strategy. You may think you know what mental health is, but I'm here to tell you that what we've thought mental health is all along is actually killing us. It is part of what hurts. This book's central intervention is quite simple. The existing industry and scholarly understandings of mental health are part of the problem, and we need new frameworks to better identify and tend to our unwellness together. To say it another way, we need to move away from the medical model of an individual pathology toward a model focusing on larger structures of unwellness. Another way, psychology, psychiatry, clinical psychotherapy, university counseling centers, and popular discourses of wellness and self-care are all failing us, and their chief failures are along the axes of race and ableism. Or yet another way, this book offers something I call a pedagogy of unwellness, the understanding that we are all differentially unwell. By this, I mean that we are all unwell in different ways, at different times, in relation to differentially disabling and enabling structures. And so, we need differential care at all times. A pedagogy of unwellness tells us that being unwell is not a failure, that our unwellness is not our fault, that we live in a world that differentially abandons us, that because of these things, we deserve all the care imaginable. Okay, the last thing I'll read is a short thing, actually quite near the end of the book, about students. And if you want to follow along, this is on page 218. I didn't feel like I mattered. A student said this to me in office hours about another class she was taking, not my class. It probably shouldn't have felt so revelatory to me. I've known for years that students don't feel cared for in many of their classes and in the university as a whole. But that moment, that particular phrasing, clarified for me both the dehumanization inherent to so many of our pedagogical practices and the reason students respond so strongly to my teaching. In my classes, they feel like they matter. Strip away all the fancy access language and creative assignments and particular policies I've developed over the years, and it boils down to this one thing. perhaps the simplest and best definition of cura personalis. Earlier in the book, I talk about cura personalis as a Latin phrase meaning care of the whole being. That is the part of the mission of Georgetown University, where I was teaching at the time. When students feel like they matter, they invest. Most of my students come to class even when it's not technically required. They usually do the readings. They think really hard about the concepts and the hard work of applying them to their lives because they have a reason to beyond grades. Everything we're doing in this class is to help them in ways they have collectively decided they need. They feel like I care, so they care about the class, but also about me and each other. When students don't feel like they matter, when they feel like the professor makes little to no space for their humanity, when they feel like the professor's rules are there to punish them, when they feel like the professor cares more about upholding the institution than about their well-being, they don't care about the class. Why should they? Because they pay tuition? Because enrollment is a contract? Contracts are based in consent. Consent is a never-ending process. One doesn't give consent once, but over and over. Otherwise, it's not really consent. This is basic consent culture and sexual justice. Students have been socialized their whole lives to respect institutions of learning, no matter how ableist and racist and sexist and oppressive they might be. The respect we are demanding from students is unearned. It is one that comes out of power's entitlement to obedience and the related structures of feeling. It is not one that comes out of mutual recognition of each other's humanity and commitments to each other's well-being. It is not born of trust. Education is not zero-sum, where students mattering means professors don't matter, or vice versa. Providing care in the forms of flexibility, leniency, compassion, generosity, even vulnerability, does not diminish us as teachers. It doesn't take away from us. It creates access for all of us. It moves us closer to what teaching could look like if all of us felt like we mattered. What teaching could look like if we all felt the collective responsibility to care and willingly, lovingly bore it. If we all demonstrated a commitment to each other's survival. If we all allowed each other to fall apart, to be unwell. Thank you. So I'll pause there and let us hear from our other panelists, and then we'll jump into a conversation afterwards.
I'm Dr. Indar or Kavita. I am a brown-skinned Afro and Indo-Caribbean woman. I am wearing a black turtleneck with a black puffer vest over it and gold hoops with a ponytail, and I'm in front of a Molloy University logo. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we honor Disability Awareness Month. I want to take the next several minutes to reflect on disability and unwellness, not as private medical issues or individual shortcomings, but as windows into the social and political worlds we live in. When we talk about disability in a justice-centered way, we're talking about the intersecting forces of racism, capitalism, colonialism, and ableism that shapes whose bodies are valued, whose pain is believed, and whose survival is supported. Too often, disability is framed as a personal tragedy, something that has to be fixed or overcome. Unwellness is treated like a failure of personal responsibility. If you're sick, tired, burnt out, depressed, or in pain, the assumption is that you didn't take care of yourself well enough. But disability justice changes this narrative. It teaches us that our bodies don't become unwell in a vacuum. They become unwell in environments where structural inequities accumulate. This can include polluted neighborhoods, inaccessible schools, racist medical systems, workplaces built on overwork, and social expectations that reward constant productivity. Under these conditions, unwellness is not a deviation from the norm. Instead, it's a predictable response to systems that treat many of us as though we're expendable. Disability justice asks us to shift the fundamental question from what's wrong with you to what's wrong with a world that can't hold our bodies as they are. When we start from that place, disability is no longer about brokenness. it becomes about a source of wisdom, a site of clarity, and a catalyst for reimagining how we live together. This is also why Tricia Hershey's work, Rest is Resistance, is so vital, especially as we look forward our upcoming event, Rest, Repair, and Disability Justice. Hershey argues that rest is not a treat you earn at the end of productivity. Rest is a right. Rest is a form of resistance. Rest is a refusal to allow capitalism and white supremacy to turn human beings into machines. She reminds us that exhaustion is not a natural state, it is engineered. Rest, therefore, becomes a strategy for reclaiming our humanity, and it is rooted in community care. In our upcoming event, Rest, Repair, and Disability Justice, we're going to have some stations, which will include a resting station where you can nap, a rip and fold station where you can partake in origami, a color and doodle station where you can color mandalas, and a meditative mindfulness station where we use rest deck prompts to spur and inspire free writes. For disabled people, chronically ill people, neurodivergent people, and anybody whose body just doesn't conform to the demands of productivity, rest is a necessity. And yet society punishes rest. We are praised for stretching ourselves thin, admired for working through pain, and taught to see rest as weakness or irresponsibility. Tricia Hershey asks us to invite a simple, radical question. What if our bodies aren't the problem? What if it's the culture and systems we exist in that need to be changed? This reframing aligns well with the principles of disability justice, which center interdependence, collective access, and community care. Access is not something we tack on to the end of an event or consider only when someone asks for accommodations. Access becomes a relationship. It's an ongoing practice of checking in, adjusting, and asking one another, what do you need to fully participate? What do you need to rest? What do you need to feel safe in your body today? Collective access recognizes that disability is part of every community and that the flexibility disabled people need actually frees all of us, not just disabled folks. So, community care, another pillar of disability justice, challenges the myth that wellness is an individual project. Instead of placing the burden on the individual to self-care their way out of exhaustion and unwellness, community care asks what structures we can build together to support each other. Sometimes this may look like flexible deadlines. Sometimes it's meetings that don't require endurance to survive. The normalization of saying, I don't have the capacity today, and environments where unwellness does not trigger shame, but compassion. When we pair the themes of Disability Awareness Month with Hershey's call to rest, we are reminded that rest is not passive. It's active, intentional, and political. Rest disrupts the idea that our worth is tied to our output. It challenges the notion that only certain kinds of bodies are productive or valuable. Rest creates space for imagination, for healing, and for resistance. As we prepare for our next workshop on rest, repair, and disability justice, I invite each of us to reflect on what we carry in our bodies. How many of us are holding stress, pain, fatigue, or grief that we've been taught to ignore? How many of us feel pressure to perform wellness even when we're struggling internally? How many of us apologize for needing rest or accommodations? What would it mean to stop performing wellness and allow ourselves and one another to be fully human? This is a time for us to recommit to building environments that don't demand perfection or constant productivity. Environments where adaptation is standard, where unwellness does not have to be hidden, where care is something we earn, but something we deserve, but where care is not something we earn, but something that we deserve because we are alive. Disability justice is not about just disabled people, it's about all of us. It gives us a model for living that prioritizes relationships over isolation, rest over depletion, and collective care over individual struggle. It reminds us that none of us are meant to move through life alone, and that interdependence is a strength, not a weakness. As we move forward in this month of awareness, I hope we begin to imagine a world where everyone has the right to be as they are, sick, well, disabled, healing, grieving, resting, or somewhere in between. A world where access is woven into our culture, a world where rest is normalized, and a world where unwellness is not stigmatized but understood as part of the human experience. Thank you for being here and engaging with this work. I'm going to pass it on to the next panelist now.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm wearing a baby blue turtleneck sweater and I wear glasses. I have curly afro hair and purple headphones over my ears. Um, I guess I'll start by saying that um, the past 2 years of being a student here, I've been unwell and um, it has kind of sparked um, me to, sorry, I'm so nervous. Let me look at my notes. Yeah, it has sparked my journey and discovery in neurodivergence. So over the summer, I got tested to see like what further accommodations I can receive from the school so I can continue to be like a successful student in this program. And I shared some of my like results to family and friends, and a lot of people were responding with like, why does having that title as like neurodivergent matter to you? And I would say like it provided me with a deeper understanding of myself and how I navigate the world and how to accommodate myself and how others can accommodate me. And I think that will help me with better caring for myself to prevent unwellness and burnout. And it allows me to take pressure and blame off of myself and redirect my perspective and attention to making life easier for myself so I don't continue to burn out. Um, yeah, that's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
We're getting some lovely reactions, Lauren, by the way, to your contribution.
Thank you so much. This is Mimi speaking. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing. Don't be nervous. We're all here to, like I like to say, we're all here to be unwell together and take care of each other and figure shit out, right? And school is actually an awful place to have to do that. I like to say. I often I joke, but this is not a joke. I feel like university is trying to kill me all the time. Even as it provides liberatory potential in space, right? It's in a machine that often is very, very good at harming us. And so and then tells us it's our fault too, right? That like something's wrong with us if we're not doing things correctly. So I really appreciate you sharing your kind of journey into figuring out what structures you need. I love you articulating that identifying as neurodivergent gives you not just language, but I'm just paraphrasing what you're saying. Let me tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing anything, but an ability to then think differently about what you need and actually ask for what you need. I actually just went through a similar testing process with Elia, actually, my daughter. Um, and we had never tested before because we are like, sometimes you just don't need it, right? We're like, she's fine. She's obviously neurodivergent, right? Obviously has ADHD, but we're so far where we don't need to access accommodations. And then she just started high school, and then things got a lot harder. And we're like, maybe now we need to get some of the formal stuff. And the diagnosis was for us less about, some of it was a kind of personal validation, but a lot of it was just like, how do we get the things that we need? And the system requires us to go through these steps to get the things that we need, right? And still made it super, super fucking hard to do, even with having health insurance and the ability to get tested in certain ways, even then translating that to the school and figuring out what you need, like all of it was a really long, arduous process. And as a lot of people have told me, a lot of college students have told me that getting accommodations is often harder than just going without the accommodations sometimes, right? Because the process is made to feel so arduous and so difficult because it's made to feel like something is wrong with you and you're getting some kind of exception or something special. And therefore, they have to be very careful and like weed out liars because apparently everybody's a liar, right? And wants to game the system. So treating us all like we're liars and having to prove our needs all the time. is an exhausting and awful process. Anyway, all that's to say, thank you for sharing that and for opening that conversation about accommodations and what that looks like at schools and how hard that is when, like Gayatri said, the when unwellness is seen as an individual problem and not systemic issue, right, that requires structures. And when some bodies are more supported than others, right? And that those structures are made invisible and normalized. So then the other structures we ask for then become like extra or some kind of luxury. Anyway, I want to open the conversation to anybody with comments, thoughts, feelings, questions, including the panelists, but also including the anybody who's here.
Kavita, do you want to add anything to the conversation on this
I
point?
was going to say, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing that you were tested and that that you were seeking a deeper understanding of yourself. I remember going through something similar in my doctoral program. I had gone all my life as a supposedly gifted student. I don't know what that means now, but now I start to question that. But when I hit my doctoral program, I started to struggle so much, and I had to get tested. And I got accommodations through my university's version of the Access Center. And what I found is that I went there as one of the few doctoral students. I might have been the only one at that point who was requesting accommodations on that level. Um, the idea is that, and I had someone tell me this, a professor actually told me, usually the students that we accept into these programs are good enough that they don't need accommodations. And so, I was aghast. It gets worse. It gets worse. Talk about structures and systems that create unwellness, and no sense of community care. I remember getting my accommodations, taking them to my professors, and it turned into a negotiation of like, well, do you really need this one? And maybe you don't need this one. And it turned into like a menu item of like, what can we give you that works for us? But, and it's what Mimi said, it was viewed as these are optional items. These are privileges you're getting, rather than, supports that you need to thrive within a system that is not meant to create wellness. It's meant to create productivity. And so I found myself in tears in the hallway in my program because I had gotten tired of the negotiation of just, do I have this accommodation? Do I not? And even now, as someone as a working professional in the academy, I often have to consider, do I actually bring my accommodations letter to work? This is probably one of my biggest dilemma that I've always had. And so far, I've chosen not to because I'm concerned that professionally it's more damaging to ask for the accommodations than to just try to figure out how to thrive with something that I actually do need to support me. But once again, we're in a system that is not meant, it's meant to fuel productivity. So that's my little contribution to the accommodations. And so, Lauren, don't be nervous. You're in good company with neurodivergence and people who've gone through the process of asking for accommodations and having to deal with, some of the trials and tribulations that comes with it.
This is Mimi speaking. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, at Georgetown, I've heard from students about professors treating their accommodations requests as like, yes, as a menu of like negotiation. Um, and I've also heard about professors dramatically ripping up accommodations letters in students' faces. Like, and this is not like a long time ago. This was like, 2 years ago when I heard about this from students. And so, yeah, it's to me that speaks to, I mean, obviously there are some people who are just assholes, right? But it's a much wider problem than everybody is an asshole. Right. What these stories tell me, what I've heard from students is um, this kind of inherent ableism in the university where nobody actually understands the ways that we privilege certain bodies, certain minds, right? And what that looks and feels like. And so therefore accommodations, yes, seen not as structures of that provide for needs, but as luxuries that actually create unfairness. People think that, right? People think that accommodations create unfairness because they have the mistaken idea that fairness is created when everyone gets the same thing. I think we all kind of buy into that. We all think that if everybody gets the same thing, then that's fair. But that's not actually fairness. For me, that actually ensures unfairness because everybody needs different things, right? And so real fairness is everybody gets what they need, which is a much more complicated definition in terms of how do you provide that, right? It's much easier to pretend that we're all neurotypical and well and don't need anything, and then give occasional exceptions. That's much easier to manage and to push towards, like you're saying, producing that productivity as a goal than actually providing care, which require much more flexibility and resources that universities, corporations, institutions like don't want to provide.
Can I add something into the discussion and maybe move it a little bit? The question of pedagogy is so important in the book, and I think this is also where thinking of the classroom and community style, right? This idea that they're learning environments we're cultivating. It's not just teachers teaching students and students accomplishing tasks, right? And I think too, as I teach my students in a philosophy of ed setting, this idea of like the training that people get when they go into special ed is tracked differently than the general ed students who are going to go into general education. And I think a lot about the pre-professional kind of work we do, especially in higher ed, and how much we really do make it somewhat closer to a hazing than it is a proper cultivation of future professionals who can contribute to community because they come at it from this different point of view. In other words, we don't make education an onboarding of future communities. We make education a gatekeeping strategy to normalize those things that we talk about in the disability justice as sites of resistance, right? So like this idea of like productivity, of like multitasking as this special skill set that you're supposed to have. And I think that's why we added on to our original title was disability and being unwell, but then we added neurodivergence because I think this is also where identifying as disabled or having certain kind of menu-based traditional access needs doesn't make sense when you have a neurodivergent population because it's not like a traditional disability or visible disability or a kind of negotiable disability. Neurodivergence doesn't have that ability to negotiate. And I think that's also what makes it very hard to seek that out. So my move a little bit is toward the internalized ableism. I cultivated also studying philosophy in a predominantly male centered kind of profession, mostly with a men doing the work, men and boys doing the work of philosophy in authority positions, telling me what I need to know. And so I'm kind of curious about how I know I've managed to internalize and kind of protect as an armor my ableism, my internalized ableism. Like if I am just doing this harder, if I just do this better, then they can't come at me. They can't keep me out. I can keep coming up. So I'm kind of curious about that cultivation. Again, if we follow the exhaustion as an engineered state, which I absolutely love, I'm taking that. I want a bumper sticker that one. I'm just asking a little bit about maybe how you might have struggled with any internalized ableism or how you might have crimped or hacked that for yourself in a way that maybe that strategy has worked for you.
Thanks, Jen. This is Mimi speaking. Um, that's a great direction to take this conversation in. I feel like we are suffused with, right? We're surrounded by ableism all the time, and narratives around what it means to be a good person. Um, I feel like that especially heightened for me in grad school. In grad school, I feel like the kind of myth of meritocracy, right? And the idea of working hard and showing that you belong, that you can hack it, that you can cut it, that you're good enough, uh, right, is where I really internalized this kind of performance because I didn't feel like I belonged, right? Because I struggled, because there didn't see people who looked like me in the academy um, who had my experiences. So it really took a couple of things that really broke that kind of broke me out of that, or first steps out of that. It was one, seeing some of my mentors not get tenure and then leave the academy. For me, it was like, oh, look, you can do everything right and still get thrown away, right? And still be told that you're not good enough. That was the first kind of like eye-opening moment. And the other is when I actually I had my daughter, I had Elia, and then I had severe postpartum depression. And so really hitting a kind of rock bottom where I was so unwell that it became clear that this cannot completely be my fault, that I'm a failure of a mother right now, right? What are the structures around me that actually make me feel this terrible about becoming a mother? What could actually support me? And that really shifted my mind from individual pathology to thinking about structures of care around me. And then since then, thank you for bringing up the classroom pedagogy, because I think the ways that we think about ourselves really suffuses the classroom and really drive some of our pedagogy. So I've actually kind of tried to work my way backwards into thinking about the classroom as an experimental space to really explore these disability justice principles in practice, right? And to how do we actually move away from these forms of internalized ableism? How do we create structures that actually support people? And the classroom for me has been a perfect space for trying to figure that out in community with students and really think about learning not as like the banking system of learning, right? Like not just like me giving knowledge to put into other people's brains and then me punishing students towards getting the right, doing the right things, right? Through fear-based policies. Um, but instead, what is a community space look and feel like? How do we learn together? Um, and the question I always ask now about the classroom and about all spaces is, how do I make this space one that does not punish unwellness? How do I have to change my policies, my assignments, my culture of the classroom, my communication so that it does not punish unwellness? For example, people don't like this, but mandatory attendance inherently punishes unwellness, right? And so, what does it look like then to not have mandatory attendance? Why do we have mandatory attendance in the classroom? I had to rethink a lot of my policies. Why did I have that? Well, we have that because we want engagement, right? We want students to be there. That's like a really obvious reason why we do that. But how do we actually get to that goal instead of punishing our students there? Can we find other ways that actually support their humanity and our own humanity in the process, so that it's not ableism that's driving our policies, but actually care and interdependence driving our policies? And so I've come up with like lots of different strategies. I have a big chapter in the book about pedagogy in particular, strategies I've come up with to try to reroute our ways of relating to each other in the classroom. Um, I take an old syllabus. I do marginalia, meaning I do like I annotate it, reading it for ableism, essentially reading it for filth, and find that even as a disability studies professor, my syllabus was full of ableism. And that was a kind of horrific and amazing discovery for me. And so I replicate that in the book to show people what it looks like to actually really think about the spaces that we have control over, right? I only have control over the classroom. I'm an adjunct, meaning I have no control over anything else in the university. I can be fired at any point, at any moment. And even the classroom, I have only some limited control because I can be fired at the end of any semester if I don't do the things that the department wants me to do. But for the moment of the semester, I have control over this space. How do I make it one that disinvest from ableism in as much as possible? And that really took me in different directions. So I reproduced a syllabus after when the pandemic hit, where I tried to do that as much as possible, and then I've iterated that over time, over the last few years. Yes, my book is available. This is in the chat through your library. So thank you so much for making that available.
I was going to add on to that, Jen, about internalized ableism. I think I felt it most acutely during my doctoral program when I was in that hallway crying after talking to professors. And I really, I bring up my cultural background often. I'm Indo and Afro-Caribbean. So the education systems and the culture I was reared in is particularly carceral. You show up to school, you are inspected every morning in mass in front of the schoolyard. There is corporal punishment. And so I found that deeply ingrained belief that I should be able to work hard enough to overcome everything became a huge obstacle in grad school, where all of a sudden persevering and pushing through just wasn't enough anymore. The unwellness was greater than the need for productivity, and I just couldn't overcome any longer. And I found that I had to really think hard about communities of care and where do I find the supports that I need? And as a professor, I'm in a teacher education program, so accreditation really keeps us locked into a pretty strict structure. So I had the challenge of figuring out, how do I create a pedagogy that is accessible while still meeting my accreditation obligations for my job? And I found that looking at access as something that is universal rather than dependent upon accommodation letters has been very helpful. I found that for me, it's really, why should someone have to ask for extra time? Why should someone have to ask for, a separate location? I open those options up for everyone. So if you need that, you don't need an accommodations letter. And when I do my intro quiz at the beginning of the semester, where it's kind of like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself, I have so many students that identify as neurodivergent, and I don't get letters of accommodations from them. So, I don't want to put them in the position of having to go through access and official channels and these systems to necessarily get the supports they need. So to the degree that I'm able to, I try my best to include many of the most frequently asked for accommodations as part of the culture of the classroom so that it doesn't have to be requested. Um, for example, my quizzes, which I know quizzes are something that are problematic in general, but they are untimed with unlimited attempts. So you have a due date, so I still have my due date, but you take as much time and as many attempts as you need to get this. And if you don't, let's say you're struggling with something, you can show up to office hours the day before the quiz is due, and I will go over it with you. So it's not about necessarily trying to punish you for not getting the right answer. You can come and show up and we can work together in communal practice. Yes, it's about learning. That's what it is. Learning is literally just repetition, and mistakes are part of learning. So I really don't like to punish for mistakes. Because then that inherently you create a culture and a system where learning is not being created. You're not supporting authentic learning. You are supporting performance and productivity rather than learning.
In the chat, Lauren quotes the myth of independence, that we can and should function independently. That is moral to be independent, immoral to be dependent, quote, end quote, is the quote that Lauren says from Mimi's book fits well into internalized ableism conversation we are having, feeling shame for being dependent on community. I used to shame myself for not being as independent as I should be, in quotes. But in all honesty, humans thrive off of community and we need each other. Thank you, Lauren, for that. Um, and feel free to come off if you want to add on. And I do think that maybe as we think about in our last 5 minutes, strategies that have kept you going. I think one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about, and I've incorporated it into all my classes and my teaching, is Crip Time, because I just find it such an important resource, because it's not exactly as the bullet points give, but this idea of like due dates, not deadlines, even this idea of like giving birth to the project you're working on, but cultivating an environment of curiosity and um, intrigue has been my go-to, as opposed to the policing strategies of surveillance and kind of like, did you do this wrong, or are you being authentic, are you doing the things that I want you to do? That's always what I think also the attendance issue is about, is a lot of that is kind of like as if I am surveilling their participation and crediting them. I have citizenship models based on that, as if when they can't come to class, there is at least a communication, and that for me is good citizenship. Like, you're communicating with me what's going on. You're not just disappearing, but that whoever you owe the attending is not going to be me. Whoever you owe that to might be you and your future self who's borrowed the money to be there. But I don't think you owe it to me to tell me what you're up to, or a doctor's note. I've gotten 2 doctor's notes this week from students, and I'm like, please don't let me know about your particular health conditions, because that's the thing about the accommodation model. When you have to do compliance, is you also have to like confess things that really, you have to trust that the people are going to be able to manage that kind of information about you in a way that is dutiful. And again, here, forced disclosure. Yes, exactly. I think that's also part of it. But Lauren, do you wanna start with the what's been working? What's been giving you kind of like that that thing to keep going forward, at least in the way you've strategized it?
So your question is like what has helped me implement like wellness?
Or
Um,
or being unwell and still being able to feel like you can be free to do this work and not feel like you're being kept out of it.
okay. So you kind of just have to like give yourself grace and realize that your 100% is different every day. And I think therapy is also very helpful. Um, if it's not talk therapy, then like somatic therapy. And I would say like body doubling, like just doing tasks with others is helpful, even though you guys are not doing the same thing, but just sitting next to someone, they kind of like hold you accountable in a way of them just being there next to you. Um, what else? Creating a safe space for yourself and others like around you that also need support and just speaking up when you need to ask for support and accommodations. And I often have to remind myself to slow down. Like I'm always like in a rush to just like do things, get it done. And I forget that like I need to breathe and just rest for a little bit. My to-do list is always just on rapid fire in my head. Um, and I would say just like have people in your circle that you feel safe with, that you can like connect to and talk about some of the things that you struggle with, or just have people that understand you, um, that understand what you're going through. Yeah, I would say those things are helpful.
Thank you so much. That's I think a wonderful list. Kavita, do you want to give us a little of thinking forward, thinking community, anything that's really just working?
I think a lot of what Lauren said also works for me, which is not surprising. We're both neurodivergent. I think learning to body double has been a big help for me. And that in its nature, you have to reach out to others to help you. And so that has helped me build a community of people who I can depend on to kind of help me. Um, in terms of community care, I think working towards creating a culture within these systems that allows me to create greater access. So creating universal access has always been my goal and continues to be my goal. I think not having students asking for what they need, but creating a culture where those needs are already met or those needs are attempted to be met has been very helpful for me. And that also makes me feel a little bit better too as a human being. Just finding a way to be accommodating and provide community care within those systems helps me on a personal level to feel better about the systems I exist within. You know, we engineer productivity. I think we can engineer community care and love and respect within these systems too. It's not just engineering for one only.
I think too that's why we've programmed to complement this the rest and repair, because I think that idea of creating learning environments in which again, student perception is this is not serious. So it's like, but it's the most serious of the business. I honestly think the most joyful work is the life-saving work that we can do, because so much of the work that we demand on students can be life-threatening, honestly. It just can make for a complexity of what they already might be dealing with. And I don't know why we didn't learn this from COVID. I think this is one of the lessons when we went back to normal, the new normal, that we also kind of had a like an absence of that knowledge or that erasure of that knowledge that was really kind of already there by many disabled people about how to live in a larger issue of sickness and unwellness, right? It wasn't the standard kind of broke for a little while, and it was in some ways a possibility and an imaginary that was there. I wish we would have done more to protect that knowledge and that imaginary a little bit more. Mimi, we are going to stop the recording soon. Would you like to end our session today with some thoughts, ideas? What's working for you? What's giving you the kind of forward thinking moving forward?
Yeah, I was trying to think, like, what are some concrete things? Um, this is okay, I'll give you one concrete thing and then one not so concrete thing to end with. So my not so concrete thing is what students often ask me, okay, we understand now that everything is awful, so that but we have to do our assignments, go to our classes, get our degrees, right? We have to get our shit done. So what do we do? Even knowing, right, this is pushing us or engineering certain kinds of productivity and exhaustion, but we still have to do it. So like, what is the solution? We can't just not go to class in our other classes. And so my answer to them is I understand you have to get your shit done, right? We all live in a capitalist society that is, constantly demanding things of us and punishing us when we don't do the things it requires of us. And those punishments are real, like you said, life-threatening. I really liked that framing of it. So I tell them, just don't believe them when they tell you it's your fault, right? Because that's the internalized part, right? Go through the motions, we have to do these things. We're also going to be told constantly that it's our fault if we're not doing those things, right? And so the least we can do is reframe that, re-understand that as not our own failure when we don't meet the expectations of these systems, because we're actually not meant to meet all those expectations. And then the more concrete part is find other people that can reinforce that for you, that you can be unwell together and reinforce for each other that when you're quote unquote failing, it's the system failing you and not you failing, right? Those expectations. And it's really hard to do it by yourself, right? That's why things are internalized. It's like everything around you is telling you something, right? So trying to unlearn it by yourself is incredibly difficult when it's being reinforced constantly. So find other people, build community where you can be unwell together, where you can reinforce a different way of understanding your body, your needs, your worth in relation to the structures around you.
I want to thank my panelists so much. I'm only just stopping the recording, but we get a few minutes, 10 minutes of open Q&A. So again, thank you to the panelists, and we appreciate you joining us.